Welcome to another Photography Simplified video. My name is Chris, and in these videos, I do my best to simplify photography for you with the goal of helping you to get out and take great photos. Today, we're going over 7 tips to help you get sharp photos. Tip number 1 is to shoot in good light. There's no replacement for a well-lit scene. Shooting in a well-lit scene will give you the best chances of getting a sharp photo. Tip number 2 is to make sure to avoid camera shake. If you're shooting handheld, make sure to hold your camera properly. Press the viewfinder up against your face and steady the camera by holding underneath the lens and putting your arm against your body. Don't shoot holding the camera out away from you, which would make you more likely to introduce camera shake. If you are shooting handheld, make sure to turn on your camera body and your lens's stabilization. This will help to eliminate some of the movement. When using a tripod, I recommend using a timed shutter release instead of pushing the button. Pushing your camera shutter button can introduce some shake into the camera. Use either the 2 or 10-second timer or even a shutter release remote, so that way you can avoid touching your camera body. When shooting on a tripod, don't use a camera strap as well. The camera strap may blow in the wind or move, making the camera shake on the tripod. Also, it's recommended to turn off stabilization when using a tripod because the camera stabilization can sometimes get confused and introduce motion rather than eliminate it. If you're finding this helpful, by the way, please leave a like and consider subscribing so you can see my future beginner videos as well. Tip number 3. Keep your ISO low. Using a high ISO can introduce noise or softness into the image, making it appear less sharp. Sometimes you need to raise the ISO a little bit to increase your exposure, but try to keep it as low as you can. This will help your photos to be crisper and sharper. Tip number 4 is to use a fast enough shutter speed. Whether your subject is moving or maybe you are, using a fast enough shutter speed will help to make sure that you don't capture any unwanted motion blur. Typically, a good rule is to take 1 over the focal length you're shooting at and shoot at least that fast of a shutter speed. Meaning, if I'm shooting at 50 millimeters, I should shoot faster than at least 1/50th of a second. This will help to make sure I don't capture any unwanted motion blur. Tip number 5 is to shoot at the right aperture. It's best to shoot at the sharpest aperture for the lens that you're using. You can take test images if you need to figure out what the sharpest aperture for your particular lens is, or simply doing some research online can sometimes help you to find what would be best. For a simple rule, stay away from the extremes of completely wide open and completely closed down. If you're more in the middle apertures of your lens, it's likely to be sharper. That being said, shooting at the wrong aperture can also give you a photo that isn't sharp because you have too shallow of a depth of field. If your aperture is too wide, you may be capturing a scene, hoping it all to be in focus, only to find that areas of the scene are not in focus or are blurry because they're not in the depth of field because it's too shallow. If this is the case, you need to be shooting with an aperture that is more closed down, meaning you should increase your f-stop number. One helpful tip is if you are trying to shoot a scene with a shallower depth of field and you want to make sure you get your focus right, is just to take multiple shots of the same scene or the same subject, making sure that hopefully one of them has the focus correct that you need. If you're finding this helpful, by the way, there may be more helpful content in my book, Photography Simplified.
If you would like a visual beginner's guide to photography, check out my book, Photography Simplified, available in both paperback and ebook format on Amazon. The book covers topics including exposure and the exposure triangle, sharpness and focus, gear, composition, editing, and more. It even includes a list of beginner tips. There are helpful graphics to explain each of the topics that are covered in the book. I've put a lot of work into this book to include everything I wish I could have known when I started out. If you think the book could be helpful to you and haven't already, check the link in the description for more information.
Tip number 6 is to get your focus right. If your subject or scene is out of focus, the image is not going to be sharp. When shooting something that is static or not moving like a landscape, Single focus mode is best. This does not refocus or change, and this will help you to make sure that the whole scene is in focus. However, if you're shooting something like wildlife or sports where your subject may be moving, likely you'll need to change your camera to use continuous focus mode. This will help adjust the focus as the subject moves within the frame. Another thing that you can do to make sure that you nail your focus is to make sure you're using the right focus point. If you're focusing on an area that is not your main subject, the main subject may not be completely in focus or maybe partially in focus. So use the buttons on your camera to move the focus point to where you want to be focusing. Tip number 7, zoom in and review your images. The nice thing about our modern cameras is we can take a picture and instantly look at the back of the camera to see how it turned out and zoom in at a magnified level and look at the details of the image. I do this frequently just to check different areas of my photo to make sure that they're sharp, that there's no blurriness or anything out of focus. Hopefully these 7 tips will help you to get out and take sharper photos. See you in the next one.